John, and what you're looking at on the screen is a gate that I had to repair and fix using my Torchmate and just some general welding and fabrication, grinding, things like that. Now what you'll see is the section in the black was a gate that was found by my parents. I don't know, was it a flea market? There was a matching section that was it's not represented in this picture, and they had a lot of problems. They had a lot of holes that had to be fixed, particularly in this area on this piece. There was a gate latch, keyholes that had to be filled, strips of metal on the side for everything to match, and so I ended up cutting those parts custom on the Torchmate, which is not covered here, and ended up welding them on, grinding things down. I had to extend the gate on either side 5 inches, do some stuff on top, and I'll show the final product in the middle. Now what this particular video concentrates on is the post that holds this gate, and my father had already purchased some material, some 2x6 material, and we needed to create a post cap for it. However, as you can see on screen, everything that was available to us was for square stuff. Now I did use some 2x2 square tubing and was able to purchase some of these 2-inch square caps. However, this other tubing, as I mentioned before, was 2x6, and so this video is to cover how I created that. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and bring up my CAD CAM software, and I'll do a bird's eye view of what the material looks like. There's 2 pieces of the 2x6 square tubing, and I welded them together in an L shape. So let's go ahead and draw that out. I like drawing things out just for the sake of visually being able to see them. So we're going to make it 6 inches wide, 2 inches tall, and we're going to duplicate this, Control D, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and I'm going to run Alt K with both of these selected, line them up on the bottom. I'm going to turn my snap to grid on over here, and I'm just going to move this. Everything that I'm doing in this particular project is going to be falling on a 1/16 inch increment, so using my snap to grid is going to work out just fine. So when the tubing is welded together from a bird's eye view, this is what I have. You end up having, you should have 8 inches here if I measure this, 8 inches, and then by 6 inches, and you cannot get a custom cap for that without having to pay a lot of money, of course. Now from a side view, let's bring up this cap again. If you were to measure, pretend this 9-inch cap is 2 inches square, like this one right here. If you were to measure from this point to this point, it will be 2 inches. However, because everything is on an angle, if you were to actually measure from this point to this point, it is not 1 inch, it's actually 1 1/8 inches. And this angle actually, instead of being 45 degrees, ends up being probably a little less than or greater than that. However, because I have to fill everything in with weld anyway, I don't mind the gap. I'm going to measure it as if it's a 45-degree angle, but I do have to increase this size. So now by measuring a 2x2 cap that I already have, I can see that that is 1 1/8 inches. What we're going to do is we're going to tuck that information into the back of our mind and try not to forget it, that we do have to resize this in the end, but that will present a problem which I'll actually show you. However, as far as designing this, it will be easiest if we leave everything proportionally the way it is right now. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and for those of you that have the full CAD option, you can highlight these and click this Centerline option, and this will create a perfect size line for you as far as being 45-degree angles from these corners here. And it just created the Centerline option. You could manually go and figure this out. I mean, this is 4 inches long on a 6-inch pipe. That means it's 1 inch from in from here, 1 inch from here, and that's 45-degree angles. So you can manually go draw that. That's not my purpose here today. What I am going to do, however, is with my I have my snap to grid on, but I don't have everything lined up to a grid mark. So let's just go ahead and move everything to, let's just say 16. This is just so our tools play a little bit nicer. And I'm going to move these over just a little bit so everything's lined up. Okay. So now I'm going to come down here and click my Node Edit tool, and just come up and click on point A to point B and back down to this corner and hit apply. And I'm going to repeat this process for each different section, and with the snap to grid on, I know everything is correct. Now we're going to create this point to this point to this point, and that actually did not snap to, it snapped to the wrong part of the grid. That was my fault. If I double click on it, I can grab that node and make it move. And then I'm going to double click on this centerline option and drag that node out to this point. So from a bird's eye view, if I were to get rid of the actual square tubing, this is what we need to cut. I do need to connect the lines, so let's go ahead and go around and do all of that. I'm going to delete that because I wasn't zoomed in close enough to get my snapped grid to work. I have my grid set up on 16th inch increments, so sometimes if I'm zoomed out I don't click on the exact spot that I need. So if I zoom in, I can go ahead and get the exact spot. Okay, so from a bird's eye view, this is what we want it to look like. Keeping in mind that currently, if we were to cut this out, point A to point B is 1 inch long, and it needs to be 1 1/8. We'll resize that in a minute. Well, the first time I created this, I can't remember exactly what I did, and it worked out pretty slick. The second time I'm creating this, because I apparently deleted the first video, I can't remember what I did the first time, so I'm going to just make it up as I go along. So I'm going to grab this point here, Control D to duplicate it. I like keeping a pattern around just so I know what I'm looking at. So now that I have this point, I need to connect these open points and apply that. And now if I take all of these lines and group them, Control G, that piece is complete. If I Control D that to duplicate it and rotate it 90 degrees, then we have this section also done because it's the exact same. Now what we need to do is come in here and duplicate these sections in here. I'm going to actually combine all of these, Control G, and I'm going to go ahead and trace out my parts now again. And there's probably a better way to do this. I probably did it a different way the first time I recorded this video, but this is what I'm thinking of now, the way I'm thinking of it, and we'll go ahead and apply that. And we're going to basically come in here and duplicate all of our pieces this way. So we've got just a few more to create. I'm going to zoom in, make sure that I click on the right 16th inch increment, and you'll notice things aren't necessarily perfect, but that's okay. Again, we're welding this later on. So that's that piece. 2 more to create. Okay, so these are all of our pieces. Moving this off to the side, if we were to move everything in relatively closely, you can see that we can reconstruct this cap just fine. And I'm not worried about getting it too close. Now the next section we have to do is, if you come and look at this cap, you have these sides down here. These are 5/8 of an inch long. So these are actually going to be real easy to create. So this will be 5 divided by 8, and we'll make it 2 inches long. We'll duplicate that, Control D, rotate it 90 degrees. Now we have this section and this section done. And we'll highlight this piece, and actually, because of the odd shape of that, we'll have to do the measurement tool. Click on point A, point B, 6 inches long. So 6 by, and I should memorize what 5 divided by 8 is, 0.63. So that's that section. Because my snap to grid is on, I can drag that one out, 0.63 high, and we'll just repeat this process 2 more times. So these are all the pieces that I need. However, as mentioned previously, because these are all on an angle, from the outside edge to the center is not 1 inch, it's actually 1 1/8 inches. So what I need to do is resize everything. I don't want to resize everything, I just want to resize certain portions. So what I'm going to do is select everything and then just deselect these parts in the middle that I want to be 1 1/8 inches. Control C to put it in my buffer. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it because those other portions will be correct. Now what I'm going to do is resize this. So if I come down here and click on point A to point B, that's 1 inch, but I want it to be 1.125, which is 1 inch and 1/8, and that scaled everything up. If I were to come in here and now measure these points, for instance, here to here, and because I accidentally clicked, it's not on snap to grid, I accidentally clicked short on that. 1.125, it's rounding up. You can see everything's the way I want it. This is, well, that's close to where I need it to be. Let me show you what I mean now. If I paste this other stuff back in, let's go ahead and do a measurement from this point to this point, and it'll be 8 inches. And it does need to be 8 inches. So 7.98, okay? Now if I come over here, and because I did the proportional scaling, let me just bump this in a little bit closer just so we're getting an accurate reading. If you hold down shift, you move it 5 pixels at a time. By the way, out on Pirate, there's a cheat sheet that I posted for hotkeys and things like that. If you want to go look for that, it may be useful. So now if I measure point A to point B, I need 8 inches, but you notice we've gained an inch, 8.99, and I'm a little crooked on my line there. I think the easiest way to correct this, well, and we're supposed to be 6 inches the other direction. Let's go ahead and measure that one while we're at it. It'll be point A on this side, point B on this side. 6.76, so we're 3/4 of an inch too big here and 1 inch too big in the other direction. But from the peak to the end down here in each of these directions we're 1 1/8 inches. So I think the easiest way to correct this is to draw a couple of boxes. Let's do this. We'll make this one 1 inch wide. And I didn't do this before, so I had to go and cut an inch out and correct it. What I did is measured back on the angles and just sliced off an inch or 3/4 of an inch, whatever I needed to do. So this one's going to be 0.75. Now if we take this and do an XOR weld, notice because I was doing multiple operations at once, it didn't know what to do, so Control Z. We can handle this by just doing one at a time. Let's move that a little bit to the right. And what I'm doing is an XOR weld or a Control 1. So if you don't see me going over and doing in the XOR weld, that's why. Select this, Control 1. Now I'll delete these sections, and that gives us proportionally what we need, but what we need to do now is join these. And I'm just going to bring them in and manually overlap them just a hair. That one's good. Now if I take this point and this point and do an and weld, this right here is saving me I don't know, 15 minutes or so. Now if I were to go ahead and remeasure this, and again I'm just doing rough measurements from point A to point B, we're 8 inches. Up here to here, well, should be about 6. And then finally the other measurement that we needed, and this is the reason why we rescaled everything, it was 1 1/8 inch, and I didn't click close enough to this line, so it says 1.1, but it is really 1 1/8 inch. So deleting our old pattern and bringing our I guess the flange areas over, if that's what you want to call them, we can take all of this, line it up. You can manually do it or use your nesting utilities, whatever you want. Apply a tool path to that and then go and cut it out. And that's what the rest of this video is going to cover. Is all done, minus a couple of problems that I had. The welding gas that I have seems to be causing porosity issues, almost like wind is blowing up and blowing the shielding gas away. So I had a couple of porosity issues. You can see one there. I might correct that here in a bit. A couple of porosity issues there. So I may correct that, but here it is. The cap fits on. I already tried it, and I'll add paint later.